Hey everybody, it's time for another Rahdo Rules Run Through with Ryan, and today we've got Cellulose. Hey Ryan, let's photosynthesize.
Feed me!
Does it have to be adenosine triphosphates? Hi, it's Ryan from Knights Around a Table. Here's how you play Cellulose. You and your friends are part of a single cell inside of a living plant, helping it survive and thrive. You'll fire off the different functions of the plant's cell in order to help it grow, absorbing water and carbon dioxide, which you'll photosynthesize into carbohydrates to build your cell wall. The more you contribute to the growth of the plant, the more perks and benefits you'll gain each day as the sun rises. If you spend your proteins and hormones wisely and play the right cards at the right time as the cell wall is completed, then you'll earn the most health points and win the game. If you don't end the game with the most health points, then you lose. It's not easy being green. Cellulose is what we call a worker placement game. Everyone has 3 tokens in their chosen player color. Well, the game calls these action markers. And there are a bunch of different spots on the board where you can place these tokens and perform different actions. The spots are either these big hexagons or these little rectangles. Multiple players can place their tokens on the big hexagons, as long as no one places the same color twice. The little rectangles usually give you a better benefit than their hexagonal counterparts, but they're exclusive. Only one player can put a token there. Throughout the game, you'll be helping the plant you're a part of grow. You'll take a certain action and pay certain resources to move your markers up through the shoots and down through the roots. Each round, before anyone takes any actions on the main board, there's a sunrise phase, where everyone earns income according to where their markers are on this board. The income you stand to earn is inside the gray banner. So if your marker is here at sunrise, you'd earn 2 cubes of carbon dioxide. After everyone has collected their sunrise income, you begin the daylight phase, where, beginning with the starting player, you take turns going clockwise, placing 1 token on the board, and then playing one of your cards. Playing a card is optional, but taking an action isn't. So you place all your tokens one by one, going clockwise, maybe playing 1 card each per turn, maybe not, it's up to you. And when everyone is out of tokens, you reach the evening phase. In the evening phase, you take back all your tokens, build 1 part of the cell wall, increase the amount of available water, refresh the card area, and hand out prizes to whoever has the most water in the central vacuole. I'll explain that bit shortly. Then, the next round begins again with the sunrise phase, where everyone collects income according to where they are on the plant board. And you keep playing until the entire cell wall is built. That's when you count up the points to see who's won. Here's what the different worker placement spots do when you place your tokens there. Actions. Anytime you see a white number, it means you get something. And if you see a red number, it means you pay something. So up here on the xylem space, you place a token to take the amount of water indicated by this water level marker. So in this case, you get 5 water cubes. Then you can contribute up to 3 of your water cubes to the central vacuole. The central vacuole is split into different sections, 1 for each player, so you can tell who put which water where. This is a little contest where the player who contributes the largest amount of water gets a prize at the end of the round. We'll see what that prize is when we look at the evening phase in more detail. Once you collect your water, you move the water marker down 1 space, which means it's better to place here sooner than later. If the water level is at 0, well, there's no more water to absorb, so you can't place your token in the xylem space. In the stomata, 1 person can place here to take 6 carbon dioxide, or CO2 cubes. Or if that's already taken, anyone can place here to get 4 CO2 cubes. Once again, you move the water level down, but unlike the xylem space, if the water level is at 0, you're still allowed to collect carbon dioxide cubes. What do you do with all that water and carbon dioxide? You make like a tree and photosynthesize. Pay 6 of your water and 6 of your CO2 to the supply to get a carbohydrate resource. If you place here, you can do that twice. And you have to be able to afford 2 photosynthesize actions, so 12 water and 12 CO2 total. Or else you can't place here. On the bigger, non-exclusive space, you can only do it once. Alright, so what do you do with the green carbs? Well, you've got a couple of options. First, you can place here to put one of your carbohydrates on the next available cell wall space going from left to right. You immediately score the number of points on the space. So placing here would get you 10 points. And notice that the point values are a little jagged, especially towards the end of the game, so there's a bit of strategy in deciding when to build the wall. If you take this space, you also get one water cube from the supply and chuck it into your area of the central vacuole. Alternatively, you can use your carbohydrates to help the cell breathe by putting your token on one of these mitochondria spaces. If I remember one thing from junior high biology, it's that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. And that's about all I remember, but thankfully Cellulose comes with a whole book that explains the science behind how a plant cell works. So you place your token here or here to pay 1 carb for either 5 or 6 ATP, or adenosine triphosphates, which is why we shorten that to ATP. ATP helps you play certain cards or climb certain rungs of the leaves ladder on the plant board. Carbon dioxide is the currency that lets you buy cards. Down here, there are 4 exclusive spaces connected to one of these 4 cards. The leftmost one is free, and the others cost an increasing number of CO2 cubes. Take the space, pay the cubes, and grab the card. That space stays empty until the end of the round. There's no limit to the number of cards you can hold or play throughout the game, but you can only play a maximum of 1 card on your turn. We'll see what the cards do shortly. Finally, there are these 4 spaces up here. Place here or here to get 2 or 3 hormone tokens, respectively. Just like ATP, hormones help you grow certain roots on the plant board. Place here or here to get 3 or 5 protein cubes. And place here to pay a carbon dioxide cube in order to secure the first player marker and to draw a face-down card from the top of the deck. As first player, you'll have first pick of spots in the next round. If you can't afford to pay what the space requires, in this case a carbon dioxide cube, well then you can't place your token there. And this rule holds true for any other space on the board. Down here is where you actually help your plant grow leaves, stalks, and roots. Place here to move your marker up the top half of the plant board, or here to move your marker down the bottom half. We'll see how that all shakes out on the plant board in a second. If either of these spots are already taken, you can place here and pay a protein cube to grow either a root or a shoot, but not both. The plant board. To move one of your markers on the plant board after you claim the corresponding action, you have to be able to pay the costs of the space you're moving into. So to move from here to here, you have to pay 1 hormone token. Once you're there, then every sunrise phase, you'll earn 2 carbon dioxide cubes as income. From there, if you take another action to grow shoots, you can choose between going over here, or up here. But if you choose to move to either of these 2 leaves, you'll be parked there for the rest of the game. You can't ungrow those leaves. It's the same story with the branching root paths. As soon as you move into one of these 3 spots, as long as you pay the required stuff, you immediately, and 1 time only, earn the points in the yellow star. These spots let you take a free photosynthesize action every sunrise phase. So, at that time, pay 6 water and 6 CO2 to gain a carbohydrate. The difference is that the moment you move into this spot, you also get to draw a face-down card from the deck, 1 time only. It's a similar story below ground. Pay different stuff to choose between branching paths. The exclamation marks indicate a 1-time perk. The red numbers are costs, and the stuff in the banner is what you get as income every sunrise phase. Usually everyone can collect their income during the sunrise phase at the same time, but if there's photosynthesizing involved, and timing matters because there are different point values up for grabs along the wall, you should photosynthesize in player order, beginning with the starting player and going clockwise. During the sunrise phase, you can collect your benefits in any order you like, which means you could soak up some water from your root space and use it to pay for a photosynthesis action on your leaf space. Evening. Once everyone has placed their tokens on the action spaces, the sun sets and you perform a few cleanup steps. The game provides you with these tokens that you can hand out to the players to make sure you don't forget to perform any of these steps. First, everyone takes their player tokens back. Then you look up here in the central vacuole. Whichever player has contributed the most water gets to advance their marker up the track and earn some points. that player also gets an extra gray worker token to use next round. The water tokens get cleared out from that player's section, and then, in a 4 or 5 player game, you hand out a second place prize to whoever has the most water tokens now. Like before, that player moves up the track to score some points, gets an extra gray worker token, and clears out all that water. Everyone else's water stays in the central vacuole, giving those players an advantage tomorrow evening. If multiple players tie for the central vacuole contest, all tied players get to move their markers up and claim the full value of those points. But they only get the extra gray worker while supplies last. For example, in a 4 and 5 player game, there are 2 gray workers up for grabs. If 3 players tie for the first prize, then because there aren't enough gray workers to go around, nobody gets one. A tie completely stops the central vacuole contest, so this poor second place player wouldn't get anything. No points, no worker. In a 1 to 3 player game, there's only ever 1 gray worker up for grabs. You have to have water in the central vacuole to win the contest. So if you had a 4 player game where nobody contributed any water, it's not a 4-way tie for first. No one has water, so no one placed. If you reach the top of the central vacuole track and you win the contest, you won't go any further, but you'll score an extra 2 points. Having a gray worker to use for the next round is awesome because in addition to getting 1 more action, you can also place on a spot that already has your color on it because gray is not your color. But if you play your gray worker here, the other central vacuole contest winner can't play the second gray worker on the same spot because you can't have 2 tokens of the same color on a single space. In a 2-player game, both players get an extra gray worker by default, and the same placement rules hold true. Just before the next central vacuole contest, everyone has to return their gray workers. During the evening phase, you always place a carbohydrate from the supply in the next space on the cell wall track. If that's the final brick in the wall, or if a player completed the wall during the daytime phase, the game ends and you tally up the scores. If not, you move the water level back up depending on how much of the wall has been built. Along here, you put it back where the single tick is. Once the wall gets built down to here, the water level goes to the 2 tick mark at the end of the round, and the 3 tick mark in the final third of the game. Finally, you refresh the card spaces. In a 1 to 3 player game, you get rid of any cards remaining in these 2 leftmost spaces. And in a 4 to 5 player game, you doff any card remaining in this single leftmost space. If there are still cards remaining, you slide them over and fill in the gaps. If the whole row's empty, you just fill in the gaps. All of the steps you take in all of the phases are printed on the board, so you don't have to commit any of this stuff to memory. If the cell wall isn't finished, kick off the next round starting with the sunrise phase. Cards. You get cards by placing on these spots and paying carbon dioxide cubes. The cost to actually play the card on your turn is over here. This protein storage vacuole costs 5 water and 2 protein cubes to play. It gets you 4 points, and it lets you pull back one of your action tokens so that you can reuse it on a later turn, potentially freeing up an exclusive action space so that you or one of your opponents can place there later. There's a set of enzyme cards that all have a puzzle piece in the lower left corner. You can chain these cards together after you play them to keep receiving benefits. For example, this lipase card costs you 1 ATP and 2 protein cubes to play. It gets you 3 points, and it lets you draw a card from the deck. On a later turn, if you play another enzyme card and do the thing, you can additionally chain together the first enzyme card you played by paying a protein cube, and gain the benefit on the bottom of the card, which in this case lets you draw a card again. Then, later in the game, let's say you play this enzyme card. Pay an ATP and a protein to get 3 points, and put 3 water from the supply on your central vacuole wedge. Then, if you want to, pay 1 protein to use this card's draw a card benefit, and or another protein to reactivate this card and do some photosynthesis. You can only pay a protein to reactivate enzyme cards you've already played. It doesn't work on the enzyme card you just played. Starch cards cost this many carbohydrates, and they let you draw this many new cards from the deck. Then you have to discard this many cards. But the cards you get rid of don't necessarily have to be the ones you just drew. They could come from your hand as well. Then there are a bunch of fancy specialization cards that get you endgame points for meeting certain conditions. Points for your sunrise water or CO2 income, double the number of points from the space you reached on the central vacuole, 2 points per one of these that you played, and 1 point per one of these that you played. This one also lets you place 1 water from the supply on the central vacuole every sunrise. This one lets you immediately place a token that you pulled back using one of these cards, instead of having to wait until your next turn. It still kind of counts as the same turn though. You don't get to play a second card after you replace your token. And you can't combo 2 copies of this card in order to place 2 tokens. And finally, this card lets you pay a protein to activate one of your Puzzle PC enzyme cards at sunrise. Unlike the other card, you can combo multiple copies of these sunrise cards together to increase your income at sunrise. Endgame. The game ends when the cell wall is finished, but that can happen in 2 different ways. Either a player finishes the wall, or the game finishes the wall during the evening phase. If the game finishes the wall, you move on to final scoring. If a player finishes the wall, you see the current round out to the end of its evening phase, including the central vacuole contest. But nobody's allowed to place any more carbohydrate tokens because there aren't any empty wall spots left. At endgame, you get one last chance to buy all the cards remaining in your hand that you can afford. You don't get to use the card's abilities, but any cards you buy will add points to your final score. Every carb token you're left with is worth 4 points. Then check to see if you've played any specialization cards that get you endgame points, and add all that to the score you've already racked up around the board. All your other leftover stuff is worth nothing. The player with the most points wins. Highest standing on the central vacuole track breaks ties. And if there's still a tie, whoever has the highest sunrise water income claims victory. If there's still a tie, all tied players share in the victory. Setup. To set up the game, put the main board on the table with the water level marker here. The board is double-sided for either a 1 to 3 player game or a 4 to 5 player game. Make sure you're on the right side for your player count. You need 1 gray token for a 1 to 3 player game, and you'll use 2 of them in a 4 to 5 player game. In a 1 or 2 player game, you get a gray marker by default to use as one of your workers. Shuffle the cards and deal 4 out to the board. Start with the plant board on the sprout side, where everyone places 1 round token for the roots and the shoots. Put all the other stuff nearby, the hormones, the carbs, the proteins, the CO2, the water, the ATP, and these tokens which represent 6 water and CO2. There are a few other tokens that represent clusters of components in case anyone gets really rich or miserly. The resources aren't meant to be limited, so if you run out of anything, just substitute whatever seems appropriate. The player who gets to go first is the last player to have watered a plant. I'm sorry, Henry. In clockwise order from the start player, second player gets 2 water to start, third player gets 3 water, and so on. You've also got these 4 reminder tokens that you can chuck out to people to make sure you don't miss any of the evening phase steps. Then kick off with the first sunrise phase, beginning with the starting player and going clockwise. Scenarios and solo modes. There are a few other ways to play Cellulose. You can choose to play one of 2 scenarios, the cactus scenario or the mangrove scenario, each of which has its own rule modifications to simulate the differences between plants growing in no water and too much water environments. You can even skip the mangrove scenario and just play on the mangrove side of the plant board, which has different costs and gives you different benefits. Unlike the roots and shoots side of the board, you can freely move backwards or sideways through the mangrove's root system as long as you pay the cost. And if you make it down to one of these powerful spots at the very bottom, you collect the reward and bounce your token back up to one of these 3 spots marked with a blue target, whichever one you choose. The solo mode has you squaring off against an opponent named Ivy, who you can challenge at 3 different difficulty levels. Ivy doesn't get any markers on the plant board. Instead, she gets this special board with a token on a growth path of her very own, and one on this strategy square. On Ivy's turn, you flip over a card from her deck and perform the topmost possible action on her behalf. If she can't do this one, she'll do this one. And if that doesn't work, well, she'll do this one. As you play the game, Ivy's different actions will make her marker move around this grid, drawing nearer to one of these 4 different strategies at the edges. A central vacuole strategy, a growth strategy, and strategies revolving around playing PSV and enzyme cards. As soon as an action nudges Ivy's token into one of these 4 borders, Ivy has chosen a strategy. You introduce a new card to her actions deck that gives her an ability that's related to that strategy. Her token can never leave that edge area, but it can nudge up to the top or bottom of it, where Ivy will adopt a second strategy from the neighboring edge and, well, yes, another special strategy card. Ivy can't reach this top spot on your growth board unless she's adopted the growth strategy. You can flip over Ivy's board to try her on medium difficulty, where she gets an extra bonus for adopting a different strategy. And to play against Ivy on hard mode, you seed her hand either selectively or randomly with 2 specialization cards that pertain to 2 of the 4 different strategies she can adopt. Seed. See what I did there? And now you're ready to play Cellulose.
Thanks, Ryan. I think we've got it. And if you folks would like to learn a little bit more about this game, you can follow the links that are on the screen right now or down in the show notes in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.